I'm recording.
You
Okay,
can start.
thank you for putting up with all of that, but this is the good part. We are incredibly fortunate tonight to have as our speaker one of the leading voices in the state and nationally on election security, Ion Sancho. He was supervisor of elections in Leon County for 28 years, ending in 2016. And over his time there, he was a major innovator and reformer. The early voting that we all like so much, he did 10 years before the state picked it up. And those auditable optical scan paper ballots that we use that are wonderfully secure, once again, he did in Leon County 15 years before the rest of the state picked it up. He's also been active on the national level, lobbying successfully for legislation that expanded access to voter registration. And to properly appreciate his status, in 2000, with the hanging Chad election, he was the technical advisor that the Florida Supreme Court appointed to oversee the recount, the one that the Supreme Court stopped. But he knows more about election security than anyone I've ever met, and I'm delighted to introduce Ion Sancho. Over to you.
Well, let me say thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to join you. And I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I love questions. I love question and answer format because it's the best way to deal with a complicated issue. What are the real issues on people's minds? And I think I could probably address most of them. So let me begin by saying that this is the most incredible election cycle that I've witnessed in a long time. And I've witnessed a lot of crazy election cycles in my time. But the coronavirus has put a major spin and will in fact the outcome of the fall election completely. To that extent, the beginning and the ending point for me is the same. We need to audit the paper ballots. While the optical scan paper ballots, excellent, only 50% of the process. And
Excuse me, Ion, wait a minute. Are other people having problems with the audio? Can you hear properly?
Yes.
Just raise your hand if you're hearing okay. Okay, then I'm going to assume it's me. Please go ahead.
Neither.
Those are the complications of Zoom meetings. I don't have the very best internet here in my house. I live 18 miles out of town. I live only 10 miles south of the Georgia border. I'm about as far away as I can get from population centers. I moved out here in the 2000 election, and I'm glad I did. But again, I'm sorry if the audio is not good, and it's I don't know what I can do about that, to be honest with you. I've checked my sound computer connection, and supposedly I'm maxed out in what I can do right now. But audits
Would your phone work better?
that the state of Florida does not do.
Yeah.
Audits. I don't know. I've never tried to use my phone for it. I could try. Would you like me to try my phone?
Why don't you do that? I just want to be sure
Hello?
we don't lose too much of what you're saying.
All right.
Maybe some people go out of video would help also.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me go to my emails.
I'm taking some some of you out of video, just so we save some bandwidth.
Well, I'm trying to load on my phone right now.
Why don't we see this text?
Pardon?
Elizabeth, why don't we see if we can go with the people out of video?
Yeah, I've taken almost everybody out of video.
Is my sound any better?
A little.
No.
I think it's hard to know until you start talking.
Well, my Zoom app is still downloading from the internet on my phone. I've not used my phone for Zooming.
You're actually better already now that we've turned everybody else's video off. So I guess we're using.
All right. Well,
go right ahead.
And again, all right. So the supervisor of elections of the state have made 2 requests now within the last month to Governor DeSantis. They anticipate that 80% of citizens will vote by mail in the upcoming Florida election. And they've looked around the country and they've seen major disasters in heretofore excellent administered jurisdictions. For example, Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a reputation of having one of the best election apparatuses in the nation. Their election melted down. And the reason it did was they were required to do things that they were completely unfamiliar with. 10% of the citizens in the state of Wisconsin generally vote on mail ballots. And that's not what happened. And what happened when the number hit 80%, it completely overwhelmed the offices. Florida, fortunately, has no excuse mail balloting and has had since 2002. So this process of having 1 million or so votes is not unusual to election officials. But they did a analysis of infrastructure available and decided that it would be impossible to conduct the entire state election that way. There's simply not enough election infrastructure. There are not enough high-speed counters available. There was an excellent, 2 days ago, NPR had a great story about how basically companies that manufacture ballots are trying to bring on new machines so they can catch up. But you can only print one jurisdiction at a time. One company, for example, prints 1/3 of all the mail ballots in the state of Florida. One company. It has to be done sequentially. And we're already behind the 8 ball because with the last aid package that the federal government passed, the election officials were given $400 million. Our share of that was $20 million. 46 states have already applied for their share of the money. The state of Florida has not applied for the money yet. The Florida legislature does not need to meet for the money to be appropriated. There is a legislative committee that in fact could appropriate the $20 million or appropriate the $4 million match to get the $20 million. And the state has done nothing. On April 7th, the Supervisor of Elections asked the governor for allowing flexibility with vote by mail and early voting. They would like to see about a 75 to 80% vote by mail election, with the rest of the people being accommodated by expanded in-person early voting, expanding early voting out to 22 days instead of 15. And this would allow them to put in social distancing with regard to the process. I myself did vote in the March presidential primary at an early vote site, and I was the only voter in the facility when I cast a ballot. One of the problems with early voting is we're going to have to do voter education to redirect citizens not to vote on the last couple of days. This process is what melted down the Los Angeles election for Dean Logan, who runs that jurisdiction, who I know quite well. They introduced early voting, but they didn't promote it. And so the citizens in Los Angeles did what they always do, which is show up on election day at these early voting sites, completely swamping the infrastructure. By moving the early voting process to 22 days and talking about it, people can start using it initially who need or want to vote in person. And there are some individuals who do not want to vote by mail. They don't trust mail. There are individuals, for example, that have to vote in person because they've got a problem. But in-person voting with problems is a good thing because it's not election day and there's time to work through the problems. So this combination of expanded mail voting and expanded early voting going all the way through to election day. So the early voting spots are going to be the precinct spots as well. This process, the supervisors of elections in Florida believe they can do without having the kind of meltdown that has been pertinent to other jurisdictions when they've tried to do things and they don't have experience doing them. Florida knows how to do mail ballots without excuse. They know how to do in-person early voting. That's what they wanted to do. The governor has not responded. Yesterday, the president of the Association of Election Officials, Craig Latimer from Tampa, sent out another request to the governor saying, look, we need to know now. And they're not asking for the legislature to pass new laws because the governor's office has used the authority in past elections. When Michael hit the Panhandle where we live, Bay County and Gulf County were issued an executive order which allowed them to restructure early voting and pre-voting. So the election officials are asked for the governor to use the same executive authority that they use in Executive Order 19-262 and essentially allow, or 162, I think the executive order is. Let me just double check that. No, I was right. 19-262. That's the executive order. That allowed Bay County and Gulf County to go into alternative early voting procedures. So again, the supervisors are saying, give us the same authority that happened when the hurricane hit those two counties. Give that authority to us statewide. We need it. We want to send out the mail ballots earlier. We want to start tabulating and processing those mail ballots earlier. Florida has one of the tightest certification timelines in the nation. We get 14 days to certify the November 3rd general election. Put that against California. They get 28 days to certify the election. Or Washington, they get 21 days to certify the election. Or Arizona, they get 20 days to certify the election. And even Oregon, who actually is the initiator of the all-mail ballot process, they require 14 days to complete their much smaller volume of all-mail ballots. Our 2-week period with a voter registration of 14 million individuals is a problem. We need more time, but we don't have it with the timelines that are provided by the state laws. So everything has to be kind of put within the current statutory structure, which, by the way, was designed built upon the theory that all the votes would be in and all the elections would be called on election night. That's not possible with mail ballots, which is why Wisconsin had to basically put a 10-day hold on their results while they processed the tremendous volume of mail ballots that they received in their recent primary. I don't know if Florida can do that, but I will tell you that when you have an all-mail ballot election, you have just made your election about 30% more difficult. Mail ballots are the most difficult ballots to verify. All precinct and early voting ballots don't need to be verified because the voter is in front of you. With a mail ballot, the signature, and that's critical, the signature on the outside of the affidavit envelope is going to be compared to the signature on the voter registration application that the voter filled out. And if it's not reasonably the same, that ballot then is going to have to be scrutinized by staff members and then brought to the canvassing board for a quasi-judicial decision. Each signature problem has to individually be brought to a 3-member canvassing board, which consists of the election official, a county judge, and a county commissioner. None of those individuals, by the way, can be on the ballot and vote. But anyways, so the process of verifying the ballot takes a tremendous amount of time. So the supervisors want to start this process a couple of weeks earlier than is normal. And then that would mean that individuals whose signatures don't match would be given more time to provide what is called the cure. And the cure does not have to be done in person. But for example, if the signature does not match, under current law, there's only 2 days after the election for the citizen to correct the problem. Again, Oregon gives 14 days for its citizens to cure ballots. Going all the way to California is 28 days for citizens to cure. Currently under the law, you have 2 days to cure after the election. In past elections, the Democratic organization, yes.
No, I've just got 2 questions already. Finish your thought, but I have a couple questions for you.
Okay, so the process of curing the ballot could be done by email. It can be done through fax, and essentially requires that an individual fill out a voter registration application and check the box which says signature update and update the signature. Now, you can't do that over the internet right now. That is just not possible. That's a suggestion that a number of individuals have made to me about, can we cure the signature over the internet? Well, if we could do that, we could have full internet voter registration, which we do not have. If you want to register to vote, you fill in the field on the screen, then you must print that application out and then apply a wet signature to it and then mail it in. That is Florida's online voter registration process. Again, is there any way we can actually use the internet to provide a signature update? That's a question that really people have been asking. And if that's possible, that would be excellent. And the Secretary of State may have opened the door, because that same requirement that an individual had to sign that paper in front of an election official existed for candidate qualifying. And the Secretary of State waived that. You could supply your candidate forms with an internet signature for candidates. Now, the query is, will you do that for citizens? And we haven't received a reply to that issue. But again, those are some of the problems that mail ballots present to the election official. And I do believe that if we can get the approval from the governor's office and the Secretary of State, that a combination of mail balloting of 75 to 80% and the rest in in-person early voting, we can accommodate our voters. I think that's doable. The election officials have committed to do that. And just as we're finding out in the coronavirus, oftentimes politicians, for whatever reason, don't want to listen to the experts who have to do the job. They prefer to substitute their own judgments for whatever reasons that might be, i.e. political. And Florida has had a horrible, horrible experience with partisan elections. I can tell you every election cycle, the Florida legislature engaged in what I consider very sophisticated voter suppression, ensuring that more ballots than necessary will not count. And you have to remember that in this non-critical environment, say in 2018, 35,000 Floridians tried to vote by mail and had their ballots rejected. 35,000. That is larger than the gap between the gubernatorial race or the senatorial race. Again, Florida does not provide a good pro-voting atmosphere for its citizens. And we're crossing our fingers hoping that the governor will provide this, because they did it for Gulf County for Michael in that emergency. We're facing emergency now. They should provide that same latitude and flexibility for election officials now. The other thing that I might want to mention is in Senate Bill 7066, the legislation that passed this past legislative session, there was a provision that allowed for auditing, intensive 100% auditing of the optical scan paper ballots. And there are 6 to 7 counties, including the president of our association, Craig Latimer, who has what is now the clear ballot audit situation, which is a parallel scanning system using high-speed scanners. And essentially, you're counting the votes twice on 2 completely different systems. The clear ballot system creates a kind of a Dewey Decimal System for paper ballots. Those paper ballots are completely organized. And essentially, after you've scanned all the ballots twice to do a recount, all you have to do is flip a switch, and you could do a complete recount of every voter's vote in every race within 30 minutes.
Wow.
And depict it visually for all of the citizens, and allow the citizens to actually purchase the database. In Leon, it would cost 2 CDs or $6. You could purchase the clear ballot CDs and audit every race in your county at your home. But again, I will tell you, election officials don't like auditing, because they grew up in an environment, in the same environment which the Republicans grew up, which they want the election to be over on election night. Auditing, that's a complete afterthought and not even promoted in our statutes. Florida, I will tell you, has an audit law. The audit law goes into effect after the race has been certified, which means that if the audit catches a problem, it is almost impossible to do anything.
Okay, let me ask a few of these questions I've got that relate to some of what you've just been talking about. To begin with, is the risk of the post office going broke another factor that needs to be taken into account as we look at vote by mail?
Yes, it is. It can not be allowed to go bankrupt. It has to be protected, which means that employees have to receive enough money, sanitation supplies. They've got to have the resources necessary to deliver the mail in a pandemic. And the president is not making that job any easier, because, as you well know, he has a personal grudge with the publisher of the owner of the Washington Post, who also is a Amazon owner, and in fact has really made Trump very angry over a long period of time. So again, the post office is critical. We've got to support the post office. No private vendor can replace them at all.
So as we're looking to this election here in Florida and hoping that the governor will do the right thing if we wanted to begin peppering him with letters, besides the governor and the Secretary of State, are there others we should be writing to say we need more time, we need more staffing, we need extend early voting?
Well, not if there's going to not to be a special session. At this point, no one is saying there's going to be. There was a vote by the legislature. They voted against it. So the only people you could direct your comments to would be the governor and the Secretary of State. But I was the Secretary of State might be more amenable than the governor, because the Secretary of State is a former circuit court judge and not involved in the kind of political hijinks that unfortunately our governor has historically been a part of. So addressing the need for getting the $20 million into the hands of the Supervisor of Elections and giving them the flexibility they've demanded in their April 7th letter is critical. And so those are your two targets. But I will tell you that I've actually resisted myself in writing to the governor because I am radioactive to Republicans. If I come out with a program, generally the Republicans are opposed to it right off the bat.
Well, we won't mention you.
All right. Just be good citizens fighting for justice.
Right. Another question that ties in with this a bit, since we are doing a lot of contacting people to persuade them to do vote by mail, at least one of our organizing partners is also pushing hard on trying to get people to update their registrations with current signatures. Is that useful enough that we should be focusing on it?
Well, yes, and I will tell you the target group that you must address are young people. Most people assume that as one ages, your signature changes dramatically. That assumption is false. The signature that changes the most is that who is a senior in high school or a newly registered individual who, before they've gone to school and gone into their work life, become an adult, have experimented with all kinds of ways to sign before they have selected a particular way to adopt a signature. So young people, for example, while comprising only 9% of the mail ballots in the 2018 general election, comprised 32% of all rejected mail ballots. And it has to do with signature problems. So young people are the ones that really should be suggested to go to the internet. You can do it on your phone and download the application and check the box that said signature update, sign it. And in fact, you might want to do that coterminously with your mail ballot and sign your signature update and send it in, and then sign your mail ballot, make sure they look the same, and then send it in. Now, one thing about mail, so that's really the best suggestion that I could give you. Without having a check on the internet on your signature, you're going to have to do the signature update. And you can do the signature update on a postcard too. One doesn't have to use. And in Leon County, we would use every communication that a voter ever sent to us and clip every signature and compare those signatures. So over time, we could actually confirm the validity of the signature. But the verification of the signature is critical. It's time consumptive. You can't count the ballots if the signatures aren't nearly identical. And in Manatee County, where they're headed by a former Republican legislator, they have the highest rejection rate of Democrats in the state. At over 3.6% of their Democratic ballots are dropped. And so there is a partisan influence, and which is one of the reasons why it's a good thing to actually go to canvassing board meetings and watch what the canvassing board is doing. See how strict their signature checks are. Because I've looked at some of the signatures in Manatee County, they would have been perfectly fine in Leon County as signatures. And the best vote by mail supervisor in the state, Pinellas County, had the 5th lowest vote rejection rate of any of the counties. When you do it fairly, that number should be less than 1%.
Mm-hmm. During the last election, this is a change of topic, but a question that's come in. Some counties like Broward seem to have challenges just managing the logistics of their election. Are there huge differences between the county systems, and where does Duval fall in the relative scheme of things?
Well, Duval actually has a former representative who's a Republican right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they fall somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
They fall somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't put them at the best. I wouldn't put them in the worst. There's differences between every county. Hopefully, all the counties have bought into the plan that went to the governor from the supervisors. That was a unanimous vote, and I'll tell you, that's radical. In my 28-year career, the supervisor of elections never demanded that the governor take any action to assist with the elections. They have now. They're concerned. They know they need help.
Huh.
They don't want to be another Laura Duff.
Right. Another issue that's been real important to our group, because we were enthusiastic about Measure 4, gathered signatures for it. And recently, there was a piece in the Florida Phoenix about this giant backlog of former felons now trying to get their voting rights restored. According to that, with just 5 months left before the registration deadline, the state director of Direct Division of Elections said in a hearing that her office had a backlog of about 85,000 registrations that wanted to be able to vote, but were awaiting determination of their eligibility. Have you heard things about that? Do you know if is there any way we can agitate to help get more help for that?
Well, it's even worse than you say, because while they have this backlog of 85,000, they can only process 57 a day. 57 a day. It would take them until 2024 at that rate to go through the backlog. It's insane, and that's one of the reasons that Judge Hinkle. By the way, I was able to listen to the trial on the phone. There was a process that was that they set up to do that. One could actually call Virginia and be given a call-in number and listen to the entire federal trial. And the judge will not allow the state of Florida to get away with this. He will issue an order, and the order will be clear and direct. And this judge believes that he has the backing of the 11th Circuit. So in fact, these numbers are going to be allowed out because the state is going to have to provide a way for indigent voters to not be required to pay to vote, because that, in fact, would be illegal. There is a federal case, in fact, on this point. And while that's not in the Phoenix article, I'm aware of it. And so the judge is going to be on firm ground, essentially striking the legislation that the Florida legislature put together on a partisan vote, I might add, to deny citizens their right to vote. So the only hope there is a good hope, and that is that Judge Hinkle will give us a ruling within the month detailing what the state may or may not do.
Another issue that maybe we're already depressed enough, but I'm going to raise it. Those of us who believe in the intelligence agencies and the congressional committees that have investigated this believe that there was attempt during the 2016 election to interfere by foreign powers with the election. I've also watched a number of deeply depressing documentaries about hacking by ordinary kids as well as foreign states. Is there a simple way to explain what's at risk from outside powers or individual bad actors within the larger electoral system, both in Florida and more broadly nationally?
Well, there is no internet security at all. So no devices that are used for elections may ever be connected to the internet. And that includes voter registration systems, and there's a problem there. For example, while the Senate Intelligence Committee did the most thorough job of evaluating the foreign attacks on the United States, they discerned that there were attacks on all 50 states. And most of the state election officials were clueless because Homeland Security determined that this was a national secret and kept the information away from Florida election officials, even lying to us directly when they called a confidential all Florida Supervisor of Elections phone conference on September 30th of 2016, where we were told by the FBI and Homeland Security officials that a vendor that did work in Florida, that's VR Solutions, had attempted to be hacked by a foreign adversary, which we now know is the GRU, the Russian Secret Service. We now know that that was successful, but when we asked the FBI on the call, they lied to us and told us that there was no successful hacking that occurred. That was a complete falsehood by the FBI to Florida's election officials on that call. I do not know why they did not tell the truth. Their argument is that the individual county supervisors whose systems had been hacked deserve privacy and were considered victims, and victims were not allowed to have their identities revealed. That is their ostensible reason why they lied to the election officials, to protect the victims. Of course, the victims are the citizens here, not the election officials. And we're the ones that needed to know what was done. There was no forensic examination, in my opinion, that could confirm what was done. And in fact, when Bill Nelson was ravaged by the media and Scott in 2018 by saying that the Russians were still in Florida's system, he was correct. He was told that information in a confidential briefing of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he couldn't put any further information out because it's classified. He was right, and he was savaged for raising that. But they're still here. And what they can do is they can interfere with mail ballots. For example, while they cannot get access to the tabulators, the voter registration system, which they can get access to because it is connected to the internet, is the information provider as where you send a mail ballot to, the proper mail ballot to send to someone. All of that is voter registration system data. And so in fact, mail ballots could be sabotaged by the Russians. They could do that. As far as I can see, we don't have any way to detect that because they can actually tell the administrator in the elections office that you've properly received your ballot when you haven't. Because again, the data is software data. Anything that's on software can be manipulated, which is why it's critical that the paper ballots have to be validated and Florida not depend upon the electronic tabulators for the correct numbers. When you have paper ballots, all you have to do is compare the paper ballot totals to the electronic totals. You would block any intrusion into the software of the vote tabulators by doing that. You've got paper. That's the best evidence. We don't use the paper in Florida. Florida's law presumes that the electronic totals are always correct. That's another reason why you don't audit. So again, auditing the ballot is critical, and demand So start peppering the supervisor of elections. Say, you've got to audit your ballots. Point out to them that the president of their association, Craig Latimer of Hillsborough County, bought that audit system. He bought that audit system because in the 2018 election, when he did his first full count and he did his complete rescan, which is all it is, a rescan, there was an 800 vote difference between two numbers. 800. In Broward County, that difference was 1,000. If you have the audit system, you can trace every person's vote on every ballot, and you can't do what they did in Hillsborough or Broward, which was horrible. Broward, I'm glad that she is gone in Broward. She was a disaster. She should never have run for re-election. I've worked with her for years, and she was one of the worst administrators I've ever met in my life. And if you don't administer this process properly, it's a disaster. This requires intense concentration of having over 3,000 separate tasks come together flawlessly. You've got to be a good administrator to do that. And you've got to have a good team to do that. One person does not do this process. So again, we do not do what is necessary to prevent the manipulation of our elections by auditing the ballots and then doing a post-election survey to determine why mail ballots weren't counted. That's critical. We don't do that at all. So there's some deficits in the system. There clearly are some deficits.
So if we were either meeting with or writing our own Duval Supervisor of Elections, obviously the audit is one of the points we would want to call for. Are there other concrete things we should be asking for?
Well, yeah, I think members of your organization should go to a canvassing board meeting and watch what canvassing board members, the 3 members who will determine what votes are counted and what votes are not counted. That's what the power of that canvassing board is. People need to start going to their canvassing board meetings. It should be on the website of every supervisor of elections of when those canvassing board meetings are. And one of the things that you can do is you can go to the logic and accuracy test, which when election officials feed a pre-marked test deck through their machines to determine whether the machines can correctly count this predetermined series of test decks. That'll be coming up shortly. I believe under the state law, the logic and accuracy tests to be done within 10 days of the opening of early voting sites. Okay. The election officials actually want to move that back and start immediately with canvassing board meetings. But again, it's a good thing to go and observe the canvassing board meetings because you will see directly how your local officials are tabulating those ballots.
And those are open to the public?
Absolutely. Every canvassing board meeting has to be noticed under state law and is open to the public.
Okay.
They're hardly attended by anyone.
I watched recently, this is a question not from the rest of the group, but from me. There was HBO you were in it, a documentary on election security. And the way they described the voting machines in Georgia, I found utterly shocking in that it seemed they really are incapable of being audited. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but is auditing possible in most of the states in the union at this moment?
Only if one uses an optical scanned hand-marked paper ballot. A hand-marked optical scanned paper ballot is auditable. Mm-hmm. What you're referring to and what Georgia did is the insertion of another piece of technology, actually 2 more pieces of technology, between the voter and the ballot. Jennifer Cohen, who's been really on this topic for a long time, and Marilyn Marks, who is a Georgia election activist, really have done a good job pointing out the insecurity. But a ballot marking device is what the voting machine vendors are trying to get jurisdictions to buy, because it's 3 times more expensive than hand-marked optical system, and it brings in 10 times more revenue to them over the life of the service contract for the individual devices. So they're basically forcing those jurisdictions that have technology manufactured by a particular company called ES&S, Elections Systems and Software. This company is only providing ballot marking devices for their jurisdictions as a accessible voting device. It's not the only accessible voting device out there, but ES&S is forcing their clients to use this. A ballot marking device essentially is you get a computerized card, which you have to get at a sign-in table. So this takes longer than normal. You take that card, you go to a computer screen, and you insert that into the computer screen, and it brings up your ballot. This is a ballot marking device. You touch on the screen, which is right off the bat, unhygienic, but you touch your choices on the screen, and then you have to tell the machine to print your choices out on a Hewlett-Packard printer. At every voting station has to have a printer now. And then it prints out the list of the candidates that you supposedly have selected. Then at the bottom, there's a QR code. Well, it tells you that you voted for these candidates, but the machine is not going to look at that list when they tabulate your votes. The machine is only going, the scanner is only going to read the QR code. And you can't look at the QR code and confirm that the names in the QR code are identical to the names that is printed in text to you. There's a gap right there. That gap is a security gap that you could drive a herd of elephants through. It makes the ballot now, and get this, in a recount in Georgia, they won't use the names printed on the piece of paper. They'll only retabulate the QR codes. So if in fact the system has been hacked, rescanning the same ballots with the QR code is going to give you the same incorrect answer that you got originally. That's what Georgia is doing. And so it's an insane concept.
It is an insane concept. But so if they wanted to, they could, reading those pieces of paper, find what you voted and compare that to what the QR code said, but there's no way to automate that.
Right, because this the election official, the Secretary of State's office has already adopted rules which said that they won't use the plain text to do recounts. They'll only use QR codes to do the recounts, which means you're not really confirming what you need to confirm, that those names are the real votes in the process.
Gotcha.
Florida, by the way, does have hand-marked paper ballots as the majority system in place. I thought we had our ballots. Oh no! Oh no! No, unfortunately, there's probably still 20% of the country that are pure on internet voting. Touchscreen machines, which cannot be audited at all. Every state has its own system. There is no coordinating national election process in the United States. We join countries like Libya and North Korea as countries that don't have centralized vote supervision. Every Western nation in Europe does have a centralized oversight process for the voting. The United States does not.
Someone has asked whether poll watchers actually make a difference in our election security.
the short answer to that is no. Poll watching, however, is excellent as part of a partisan get out the vote program. That's what poll watching really was designed to do. Wasn't designed to catch problems with the technology. It was, and I will tell you, I have been a campaign worker in many campaigns before I became a supervisor of elections, and we would utilize a very sophisticated get out the vote program with direct contact, either phone banks or door to door. And now on election day, you have a list of everybody and you know who they're for, and then you check. The poll watcher provides you a tick list, a checklist of the voters that have voted. If your target has not voted, then you're going to go and hunt that down and get that voter in. So poll watching is part of the political process to ensure that you can maximize your votes. It's not very good, except for suppression, because you can challenge, and the challenge process is an awful process. I actually refused to implement it in Leon County, and the Republican Party sued me, and they lost. But the challenge process is a vote suppression process, but the rest of the poll watching process is pretty boring.
Okay. Have other people got questions they haven't found the chat box to send, or I'm going to unmute you all briefly in case someone has a question they want to ask aloud. Well, if not, I am very grateful. We are very grateful for your having come, and I appreciate having your email. I would appreciate, if it's possible, if you could send a copy to me of that letter that all the supervisors sent to the governor. We would love to have that as a reference point when we write.
Absolutely.
And
I will send that to you this evening.
Wonderful. I really appreciate your time and your patience with our technical glitches and all that you've shared with us. Thanks very much to you, and thanks to everyone who came.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to talk.